I first have to say that this talk is my own, and I own it, and nobody has approved of it or is responsible for it. And in fact, even my wife doesn't agree with most of the things I say. And I'm glad to know, though, that from the things I've heard here, I've got some compatriots. So I appreciate being invited. I want to express my appreciation to Dr. Orient for the privilege of being invited to speak here at this meeting among so many outstanding physicians, scientists, citizens. Thank you. In this talk, I will review lessons from personal experience for preparing America to survive a nuclear attack or radiological dispersing device attack. I like to call it radioactivity dispersing device. You've heard it so called a radiological device attack, a radiological device attack. I think we don't want to bomb and disperse radiologists, so I don't like that terminology. We're dispersing radioactivity, not radiologists. And most important to begin proper preparation of responders and the public in the aftermath of many years of misinformation. And I've been trying since I was dragged in as the first chair of Homeland Security for the Health Physics Society. I've been trying desperately to find some ways of getting common sense training down to the responder level. And a lot of my recommendations after the 1 year I agreed to serve were not carried through, and we still find people talking about the fear factor. And the public, if you talk to your neighbor, you talk to your responder, your fireman, your policeman, you find that they still don't understand what they would do if somebody had a Geiger counter and they saw it go upscale a little bit. So I'll talk about that a little bit, but to me, the end run around all this ignorance is this CIRAD dosimeter, which fortunately Dr. Jane Orient has seen to display and provide a paper that she had published, and she actually should be co-author of the paper. That I think it's in your handout, because she rewrote it for me better than I could write it to get it published. She is an excellent writer as well as speaker. And that's this paper here, which will explain to you why everybody should have one of these. First of all, it's very inexpensive. I've followed the development for over a dozen years. I have a few that are unwrapped that I've been wearing for several years. They're still good. Now you'll see a little blue collar on this one because we do have natural background radiation. But you can subtract that amount of radiation and still use it. So I still carry it in my pocket. I'll put it back here where it belongs. I can show that to you. You can examine it and see that it's still good. In fact, one of them went through the laundry. I forgot to take it out of my pocket a few years ago. My wife put my shirt in the laundry, it was still in there. It came out just about the same as it was. So a few years ago, I went up to see the quality assurance and how this man developed this and how he manufactured it. This is Dr. Gordon Bichtel, a one-man corporation, an inventor who's invented many things, and he invented this in part with your tax dollars. And more recently, it has been approved by the Department of Homeland Security. They tested it at their laboratory. They found it was of wonderful quality. So I was so impressed with him. He didn't want to market. He likes to do research and invention, and he does a good job of writing slideshows. He's won a number of awards. But, you know, this is something that is so cheap. You can get them for $10 a piece by the thousands, and even less if you could get them to the entire population. And yet, even though I have talked a nice young lady to set up her own company for distributorship, and she has done a marvelous job of getting many, many different government agencies to say, yes, this is a good thing, you should buy it. And although the Department of Homeland Security provides funds, as you know, billions of dollars to the states to get equipment for Homeland Security, and they will spend $1 million on a fire engine and all these nice toys, but don't understand yet, these many years after 9/11, they don't understand yet that if the public panics because they see a Geiger counter go upscale and they have no information, and they run into a hospital and destroy the hospital, what good is the fire engine going to do? the responders will not be able to do anything if people run out on the streets like they did at 3 Mile Island. And I was there, I came there, and I found the department chairman had already evacuated their families. I had to speak on Monday after many of the evacuations to the medical staff at 3 Mile Island and hospitals, and tell them that, you know, if you were really worried about radiation, and you shouldn't be, because nothing's going to come out of this reactor despite what Sternglass has said, and I have absolute evidence against my old friend Sternglass right in this book. Exhibit 3, he uses my name. He calls me an expert. I am an expert. I'm an expert that he's a kook. But it doesn't matter to the press. They've spread his information, his books, and many, many other things with blanking out the truthful scientists among us. Some who have given good talks today. And that's why the public basically is concerned about nuclear power and anything that emits radiation, including good CT scans. And there's some discussion of that in my book also. So I only brought a few copies of the book. I'm selling some of them because I've spent thousands of dollars giving away free copies of preliminary versions, and my wife says I might live a little longer. She didn't expect me to live this long, and I need some of my savings that's left from my old age. I'm only 81 and a half. I don't know why she thinks I'm getting old. I'm still playing tennis. That gets back to another talk by Dr. Maccabee. It's interesting that my existence here correlates with what he said about hormesis. Because I was in the first 2 H-bomb tests as a physicist. The second one I had my own little project. I jumped into 30,000 MR per hour, which is exactly 1 million times the rate that will make one of these so-called pagers, small Geiger counters, go upscale that our responders are being taught to worry about. 1 million times. And that was 56 years ago. I'm here today, standing here playing tennis and feeling well. So I'm an example of hormesis. And I'm glad that Dr. Maccabee told me why I'm here. Thank you, Dr. Maccabee. His talk was excellent. And I have a chapter 4 in this book, which has been available to somebody, not too many left. I think you've seen it laying out on the table, which is almost in published form. I've got the page maker. I'm going to make a few more corrections. There may be a few more word changes, but it's pretty much close to the final copy. And there won't be many, or any maybe, copies left here to buy. So pick up one of these flyers that I had made some time ago. It's a little bit old. It has the address where you can order them. And if you don't want to pay for it, you don't think it's worth it until you look at it, I'll send you a free copy, and then you can pay it for whatever you think it's worth. But when it goes really published, I've got to collect some money on this thing. So I'm sorry, but I'm charging $40 here, and I don't know what will be charged later, but that $40 just partly reimburses me for what I've done to get this thing out here. So what else can I show you? I've got a show and tell here. Well, this article is in your handouts, I think, also, and it explains why everybody should have this. At least their responders should get it immediately under public funds. Just a part of what they get for these fire engines and so on, but buy it for all the responders in the country. So try to promote that in your locale and among your state organizations. And this article also explains why these could also be used ordinarily in nuclear medicine or in radiation therapy. And I was in radiation therapy for a while, and I have appeared as an NRC auditor with 3 other professors up at Yale when they had 4 misadministrations. Well, if you want to avoid all misadministration, which you can do, I think, in radiation therapy, and should, because the media pick up every little accident, you know, and they scare people away from getting scanned, and they scare people away from getting treated. So there are some reasons in here, explained even more in my chapter 8 in my book, listed the advantages of having the CIRAD dosimeter. This is the article that Dr. Orient rewrote for me. She did a better job than I could have done. That's another thing I thank her for. So that's, I think, already handed out. Here's being handed out, I think. Now, are you handing this? This is being handed out. This is one of these CIRAD that I showed you, but it's in the little packet that it comes in. And you should probably wear it in that packet. But you should open it up and read the instructions that come with it. They're very simple, and I think any ordinary citizen above a moron level could understand these things and at least have his own assurance that he has not received much radiation that would give him any harmful effect, which it would be true in either an atomic bomb, an H-bomb attack, or an RDD attack. Most people will not get, they'll be in areas, maybe tens or hundreds of square miles of area where there'll be enough fallout to make these little Geiger counters go upscale. And I asked one responder who's in the Montgomery County Fire Department. He had a jacket on. And I know they have received a lot of training. And I asked him just about a year ago, what would he do if he saw a Geiger counter upscale? And guess what he said? He said, I'd run. Can you imagine that? I jumped into 1,000,000 times that amount to get my neutron spectrometers, and I'd do that 10 times to lift any one of you up into a helicopter, or any 10 of you, because it would only give me 25 rem, which is an acceptable emergency dose, particularly for an old man like myself. I get carried away on this thing because I had so many years of frustration trying to get common sense out to the public about radiation and nuclear power. So forgive me. Next thing I'd like to show before I forget is this book that I put out for the Health Physics Society in 2004, edited by Alan Brodsky, Raymond Johnson, and Ronald Gones, who's an MD, PhD in nuclear physics. I edited the entire thing, but these people did so much work, I thought they deserved to have their names on the cover. I've got about 250 pages in here. This is a much more technical detail, mathematics and so on, that health physicists or scientists can use after an attack to help clean up the area, or though even those who are a little rusty could review some of their health physics, radiation dosimetry, and so on with what's in this book. Yet, several hundred copies are still available in hardback from the publisher, and the reference is in here. And I wish everybody here would buy one, because it might seem expensive at $95, but we've got millions of dollars worth of free work put into this thing. I did this for free in 1 year. I got 40 experts around the country to write chapters, and yet I find very few people have them. In fact, I gave away several $1,000s of myself until my wife stopped me from giving out free copies. This is a preliminary copy that's paperback. The hardback copy has an index. So that's referenced in here. I hope you can get your people who are leaders, supposed leaders in Homeland Security or Civil Defense, to have at least one for their organization. And this is a book I put out in 1996 with a small publisher, and this essentially, I'm happy to know, agrees with what Dr. McAbee pointed out. It's got a derivation and historical story about how the radiation standards were developed from the Hiroshima and Nagasaki data and animal data, and there's a chapter on hormesis in here. And I was so happy to find out that he didn't contradict anything that I put in here already. He already has a copy, so he's going to check it for me, because Dr. McAbee gave an excellent lecture today. I'm really impressed with all the people that are attending this meeting. This is a very short argument. It's an abstract of a paper, a talk I'm going to give at the end of the month up at the Health Physics Society annual meeting in Salt Lake City. And you should also pick up one of these, because if you don't want to read a lot, this is a short reason for getting one of these dosimeters. Yeah, so, well, I guess you all have copies of the slides that I'm using also. So I'm not going to try to read everything on my slides. The slides are for the purpose of giving you a rough idea of what's in the book, because the book is intended to cover the information needed by many levels of people. The general public, responders, sometimes people like myself who might not have had some of my experiences with the early fallout from nuclear bombs, and nobody under age 65 could have had such experiences. And there's a lot in this book, some of it taken from this book, which will alleviate a lot of fears, even among the medical doctors and the people who have to handle the patients. Because I have handled patients who were contaminated with plutonium, americium, which are highly radiotoxic, as we say. In fact, there is radiotoxic. If you take a a bomb fission product cloud, and yet somebody breathes in it as it goes by. When you consider the relative radiotoxicity on the average of the fission products that would be inhaled in, I have handled people who have taken into the bodies that equivalent or more in plutonium, americium, and I've also handled in a major hospital with Dr. Wall, my physician boss, who was head of the department, and he made me technical director of radiation medicine across the street at Presbyterian Hospital. And there's a chapter in this book, chapter, I don't know, 23 or whatever it is, by Brodsky and Wald, which summarizes how we handled these radioactive patients, how we evaluated them, and it refers to the documentation also that we published on it. And you will find out that I am still here. I didn't inhale or breathe in any significant amount of material from handling these people. So if we can just get the hospitals properly trained, there should be no fear of anybody in the hospital staff of taking in anybody who might be contaminated anyway. But preferably they should have washed off at home, but if they haven't, they're not going to kill you. The real danger of handling patients in the early days was, and why they built in some of the major installations of the Atomic Energy Commission, some of the major hospital installations around the country of the Atomic Energy Commission installations, was because when people were fooling around with piles of fissionable material like they did, and you may have heard of the accident that killed a man at the very early days because he was pushing something, a piece of plutonium with a screwdriver, and it slipped, and he got enough radiation to kill him. That's instant radiation. There is a lot of neutron fluence that is from immediate radiation from a nuclear bomb. That was what I measured in the second H-bomb test myself. I wasn't there. I put my dosimeters out there, my spectrometers that I picked up when I jumped on the island that was contaminated. But you see, most of the installations don't deal these days with, they would not allow anybody to deal with unshielded fissionable material that's being used in fission product mock-ups. So that's probably not a problem. In any event, if there was a problem somewhere, this same dosimeter can also measure some neutron fluences with proper calibration because it's made of light materials that are heterogeneous, and neutrons kick out hydrogen atoms very nicely. So that can also be used with proper calibration. It's been tested a little bit for measuring neutrons, but that's something most of you will not have to ever come up against. So let's see, my show and tell things are up here, and I think I showed my book with that. Yeah, here, and I showed this. I think you all have one, or should have one. And I guess I can get on with my talk. Let's see. So I'm going to just do ad-lib some of this. I've written it out, but when I read it, it sounded terrible. Not only did my wife not approve of this, when I read my own talk, I didn't approve of it. I hated it. And this meeting was so interesting, and everybody here is so interesting, you'll forgive me. I really didn't take time to rehearse this. So I'm really going to stumble through it. So this slide just gives you a summary of the topics of presentation, but in this book that I've put out front, there are only a couple copies left, I've written a detailed, in addition to the initial table of contents, I wrote a detailed table of contents that's in there, and if you order one, you'll get that, because we don't have an index yet. It's not quite published. There will be one index in the final copy. But it's close to published and it's pretty well updated, pretty well corrected. So you can read those for yourself. Basically, start with the reasons we have a concern. I think you all know about that. Next, I have some pictures of news articles to show you that, well, maybe it's possible also that these people could get these atomic bombs and RDDs. How many people think that it's not likely that we'll ever face an Iranian-made atomic bomb? So I think you don't need to be persuaded in this audience. And then I talk about why it's still possible to educate the public about these things, if we can get to the public. problem, maybe we can't get to them well through the media. And I give some examples in chapter 1 and 2 of my experiences with the media, with the newspapers, testifying before Congress, not being picked up by TV, along with everybody else who was on the correct side, and many other of my experiences in trying to get to the public. And I find the best way to get to the public is face them like this, where you can tell them the truth and they hear it. And they're not blocked from communication with their rights taken away by the media. And so you might be interested in some of my personal stories there, which I've told now, which probably haven't been heard before. Then I also include some summary information needed for responders. And I have a chapter 4 on updating this book that I put out on the radiation risks, both from acute exposure, chronic exposure, and a bit of updated material about the effects on infants and children in utero. And I think my ranges pretty well agree with some of the material that the good Dr. Maccabee gave you this morning. And then toward the end I have some recommendations for the average person on shielding and so on. Recommendations for people who don't want to do very much ahead of time. Recommendations for people who are willing to build some shelters and prepare ahead of time. And I have chapter 8 on this very wonderful dosimetry where I list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the advantages, many advantages of this dosimeter. And then I have chapter 9 of conclusions and a number of appendices with information. So that's what's in the book. Next slide, please. We all have these motivations. We value human life. I think everybody in this room does. That's why you're here. And we can reduce casualties and avoid panic by informing the public of actions they can take to reduce exposure and the training that we can do for ourselves and for all the responders. And the public motivations are listed here in more detail again. The events of September 11, the news about terrorist activities is in the papers almost every day, etc. At the bottom, I've emphasized what physicians can do. Before I came here, I thought this was mostly a group of physicians. I find there are 20%, somebody said, of physicians, and there's a story I wanted to tell, which I've told some of you. My friend, Professor Herman, who passed away, may he rest in peace, March 7 was a year after he died. He was like my big brother when we were co-students in Oak Ridge, and we've been close friends ever since. And he's told me a story about how physicians can really, really do a lot of good because they're respected a lot more than reporters and congressmen and media personnel. And he was involved in a course that was given to physicians by a nuclear power company that was putting up a power plant in the area. And physicians happily attended because it was in a nice location where it was basically a vacation spot every summer. They came for 2 weeks. The nuclear power company paid for it. And they all showed up for 10 years. And Herman was involved in it. He's an excellent lecturer. He was an excellent lecturer and had some top people. And as a result, in that community, they had no problems about building that reactor from the public. Now, there's a model there which can only be done all over the country by some physician who would lead that sort of a program. And if the nuclear power companies would have the sense to pay for it, that could do a lot of good. So I think physicians are in a special place, and they have the scientific background to pick up again on what they may have forgotten about radiation, and they can know how to explain things to their patients. So I wanted to mention that I think physicians could have a very special role. And of course, one physician, Dr. Orient, did have a special role in bringing us together. This is a fantastic experience for me. Now this slide, next slide please, is a picture on the front of this cover. I took it when I took her grandson to eat on the Bay Side at Ocean City, Maryland, and we have plenty of songs about San Francisco. The second time around I sing it about Ocean City, Maryland, because we also have beautiful sunsets and we have a beautiful moonrise over the ocean. And we all look to peace, and we look at this beautiful world. And I think about this beautiful world, what it means to our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and so on, for all of us. And I dedicate this book. My work is because of my concern about the future of this nation and its existence with all its good things for our children. Otherwise, I would just coast along the rest of my years and play tennis and play the piano and be happy. I do that. I'm happy when I do that anyway. It gets my mind off this book, which is it's a terrible book to work on. I'm glad I finished writing it. Next slide, please. The government is slow in its safety plans. Well, we know that. Well, here's a couple more. We'll just flash through these because these old ones are from the old book. But you see, even if we come up to and this is from 2000, the CIA says this, now we're up to the new ones, but the first few pages of my slides are about some old ones back 2002, 2003. You see the same question is still here. We have a set of slides that I had prettied up and put in here. I mean, of actual pictures of news articles. And the first set of news articles shows they want to get us. The second set of news articles are just a sample of articles that show, well, they might be able to get us with fallout radiation, scare the devil out of people if we don't get these SIRAD dosimeters at least as an end run to educate the public and to give them something for their own security and feeling. Now, the next slide, please. Oh, yeah, here, that's the slide I want. I can't reasonably point to the paragraphs, but you will see my name mentioned by this great Dr. Sternglass, who's listed as Professor of Radiology, you see, at the University of Pittsburgh. He was my colleague for 10 years. The funny thing is, I recommended to my boss that they hire him. I'm sorry. He was a pretty bright guy. He was already a fellow of the American Physical Society, had excellent credentials. And he was going to come in and develop digitized X-ray photographs of people, so they cut down the exposure. It sounded very good. He ended up turning a lot of his work over to a colleague he hired. He was already a tenured professor. He ran around the country being an anti-nuke. And many times I tried to bring him down to earth, and I got a lot of stories to tell, but it was no use. And he still has his name on some books that are being circulated now. And a lot of people don't realize it's not just Jane Fonda. I think this guy himself has done more harm than Jane Fonda, because he's got to the public through these media, and even over in France and other countries, many, many times I've watched his work. And I could not refute this, because this was sent to me by 7 friends throughout the nation. And they said, "Alan, are you supporting Sternglass?" I said, "No. I'm going to write to these editors to put on the front page also my refutation of what he's saying here." I can't see whether the second or third paragraph. He says, "Alan Brodsky, an expert, has shown there are 21 nuclides that have been dispersed." Well, he didn't even consult me before writing it. He was using a paper I gave him in 1965, where I calculated the effects of inhaling in a fission product cloud from either an atomic bomb or from a nuclear power plant that had released its full fission products with different operating times and different decay times. Because I wanted to use this to double check what they called the maximum credible accidents. I called them maximum incredible accidents in the early days. They were very safe when I was in the AEC, of making sure these reactors were safe, and it didn't take so long to get them licensed. All right. Well, no need to talk about that anymore. You read it, you see how false it is. He accused the NRC of covering up radiation. He's the one who's lying. And 7 people sent it around to me around the country, and I'm not even sure that some of those people don't realize I'm against Sternglass today, because I couldn't get back to him through the media, right? So what does that mean? They have taken my right of free speech away in a day when we can send radio waves across the country and TV sets through people's bodies even, and they light up a screen, and you have no way, if the media won't give you a fair chance to talk the truth, there's no way you can refute that. In the old days when this country was first born, they didn't realize that. When they talked about freedom of speech, they knew that if somebody told a lie about you, you could get on your horse and go around the neighborhood and knock on the doors, right? and you could tell your other neighbors about the lie. You can't do that if you can't use the media. So the media are a big part of it, not just for Jane Fonda and the movies, but the whole general media are a big part of it. And Bernie Cohen, in his book Before Mine, Books Before Mine, he has a chapter where he did some research looking through the New York Times to find out how many times they talked about radiation leaks as if they were a big problem. So Bernie Cohen, if Bernie Cohen's books had been read, I wouldn't even need to stand here. The country would have already been building nuclear reactors, nuclear power plants. And the same is true with good old Senator Domenici's book, and Alan Walter's 2 books, and where he talks about the fact that we have about over $700 billion in economy that is due to the fact we use radioactive materials in nuclear power. That astounded me when I looked at it. And then there was Gwyneth Cravens, who was anti-nuclear, and her book is out. We should be talking about that to people too. Read that book. She was an anti-nuclear reporter, and now she has a book that says we need nuclear energy. So that's one of the references in here. I put, even though I had to stop making this book about nuclear energy, it was getting too big. That's another book. But I do have a lot of things in here that would promote nuclear energy. What do we tell responders? Well, tell them the practice with the radiation distribution, understand what a rad means and how much effect you would get per rad. Minimum information for responders. You can read these. I should deal with things I can maybe talk about a little bit. Now this, next slide, next 2 slides, please. I've already taken up a lot of time, so I'm going to have to rush through. So just as I said at the beginning, these slides are just to give you some idea of the scope of the book. I can't quite do that because there's an awful lot of technical information for the scientists and engineers on how to measure the, I'd say, 10-day intakes of food and water and things like that. We used to have that in the old days just for fission products. I put it in for all the different nuclides you might be exposed to after an RDD attack. So next, I guess go on to the next slide, please. You can read that with at least a magnifying glass, looking at my slides later. And that's the next slide, please, after that. That you can read. That's just a short list of information. They should know that 25 to 50R might start giving you some blood changes, but probably not kill you, and very low probability of additional cancers. All that's in my chapter 4. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We can. That's that abstract you already have. And here's a picture of the badge I just showed you. And you open it up. That's what you'll see. It's pretty much the same one that's in here with the instructions. And let me know if there are any changes you think should be made in the instructions. I think they're pretty clear. It also has a fit indicator, by the way. He called it fit indicator. Dr. Patel, who invented it. It's false indications, positive and negative readings, and also it'll turn color if it's overexposed to ultraviolet, which you shouldn't have to do if you just keep it in your pocket carefully or keep it in the envelope. And if you treat it right, it's probably good for years. I've had some in my pocket for years. He'll only claim accuracy for 1 year, but I think they're good for years. And if you get them out to people, it'll do a lot of good to save life. Teaching aids we talk about, and in the former book from the Health Physics Society, which is referenced here, which you should get, there's a lot of information on sites you can go to for information and where you can get teaching aids, which were handed out actually at the 2004 summer school. It's been updated a little bit. There are places where you can get plenty of teaching material. You can go out yourself and do some teaching in your local area, try to get some truth across. We have to try to do this as much as we can at the grassroots level where we're not interfered with by the media. Now I want to do a little demonstration that I usually do for people. Next slide, please. Right at this one you see one of the oldest civil defense Geiger counter instruments, which are still working. I've got some in my car. But during the Clinton administration, they tore apart the civil defense program, which we had set up in the early days, and threw it away. And now they're reconstructing these programs with people who don't understand the problems. So that's another reason I had to write this book. One of the things I often do when I go out to the public is give them this little demonstration. This is a new type Geiger counter, much smaller than the old ones, right? And it costs about $285. So you wouldn't expect all the public to buy. Oh, here's the check sources up here. You got to always check an instrument to make sure it works. So an instrument should have a check source. Well, you can hear it working. So usually check it before and after you use it, so we know it's working. Now, Jeremy's going to hold this plate for because he's brave, and maybe you'll hold this here. See, Jeremy's exposing himself to radiation too. Hold this with this circular part. There's a window there that's covered. Wow, I'm a dangerous person. I'm crazy exposing myself to radiation. Any radiation is dangerous. Any radiation, right, is dangerous. That's what they put in this document from EPA in recent times. Watch this. I'm not afraid. Ouch, ouch, ouch. You see my hand is absorbing all those beta particles from uranium. From this whole plate. Why am I not running? What is the risk? Sounds like a lot of radiation, doesn't it? That's what public is going to hear when the responders encounter just a little bit of fallout radiation, right? Well, I've got some slides that you can read. You probably can't read them here, but they're in the book too, to show you with simple arithmetic, even not counting hormesis, extrapolating all the way down to zero effect. I calculate something like, what do I have on that slide? Let's see. I have to go 2 more slides to show what I just did. On this slide with my, just showing, next slide please, Jeremy. We'll do this quick as I can. See, time is really racing. This is 16,090 because you have to have a little thing up in the top here that tells you multiply by 1,000 when you get up to that kind of a rate, right? 16,900. Then I put my hand in there and I stopped it and it came down to 547. So almost 16,000 beta part enter a minute. If I stayed there for a whole minute, boy, I'd really be crazy, wouldn't I? Well, let's know the next slide. This is to give you some idea how they use risk factors in the government, which is okay in peacetime. You see, rad per minute is counts per minute. The number coming through per minute. Per square centimeter, you divide by this. 1 gram per square centimeter is a unit of thickness, many of you know. And you multiply by, and you have 2 MeV per gram per square centimeter. This is just a rough rule of thumb because God made it so nice that the relative stopping power of beta particles in things like tissue, for the range of beta particles we would encounter that would give us any skin burns or anything like that, would be about 2. It varies a little bit. It's about 2. To make it simple, I use 2. And the 1.6 times 10 to the minus 6 is simply the ergs per MeV, which a lot of you know. So these are common numbers. I divided by 30 square centimeters my hand it went into to get the depth and the volume. And then 100 ergs per gram per rad, which is definition, and I come out with 1.1 times 10 to the minus 9 times the counts per minute would be the rad per minute. So I multiply that through by 16,500 counts per minute, and I get 1.8 times 10 to the minus 5 rads. Well, that's only a 0.018 millirads, isn't it? It's a pretty small dose, huh? Even for holding my hand in that large count rate for a minute, which would scare most health physicists because they saw that in the laboratory, they'd close the laboratory down because they're used to only peacetime regulations. Now, the next slide shows that if you take the risk factor 5 times 10 to the minus 4 per rad, multiply by that, but then take the fraction of your body that's exposed, and obviously you don't have to know a whole lot about radiobiology to realize that the risk factor for the hand is probably much less, than the risk factor for vital organs. But I'm taking just the ratio of the volume, and I get my chances are 2 chances in 1 trillion of getting cancer, and the most solid cancers don't occur for 20 years, so I'll worry about that with 2 chances in 1 trillion when I'm 100 years old. So that's how ridiculous it is to say any radiation is dangerous. And you'll find most health physicists, they'll show you these activities from these places, but they're afraid to put their hands in it, in the way to get the beta radiation. But I don't worry about 2 chances in 1 trillion when there's 1 chance in 100 of getting killed in a car accident in your lifetime. So then there are things in the book that explain radiation. Next slide, please. We'll have to flash through But you all know about that, what alpha beta particles and how their penetration is. But I'm showing you that these things are in the book for the average citizen to learn a little bit too about radiation. And there's a short chapter 3 on definitions. And see this book, and in the book you will see also more recently, as I advised, I have italicized things that are just to be read by most citizens for their own protection, because there's a lot of technical information in the book too that I wanted to get to my colleagues who might have not have had my experiences or been so heavily involved in teaching and using radiation science for radiation protection. So at least I got this book off my mind. Now I can go on to a nuclear energy book. And these, of course, are ranges of exposures that you get normally, all the way from background to 6 million millirem for 6 weeks of treatment and radiation therapy to one part of your body, that is, of course. And so there's some information on background radiation and natural radiation in the book. Not as much as in the big book here, but enough, maybe more than enough for most people. And I have said in the book, before chapters and before sections, read it if you need it, or skim it or skip it, you know, because I tell them there's information there for the professional scientists that most members of the public don't need to do the smart things immediately after a nuclear detonation or a RDD or anything else that spreads radioactivity around. And acute radiation exposure levels, this is a sort of a simple thing that I think any responder, I found in teaching responders when I was in Civil Defense Administration out in Nevada and over 7 states in the District of Columbia, that all these people are intelligent enough to learn this little bit of information. I used to be required to give an 8-hour course when I was in Civil Defense Administration in order to be able to award radiation detectors to people. That was back in 1956, 57. And so I have in the back of my book, this book also, the kinds of material I used to teach them. And you'll see some technical material there, and I found they could understand it. But if we don't have such a program that trains people properly, at least if you get the CRAD dosimeter around, at least every person has on them something, so they won't at least panic in the very small dose ranges that the vast majority will receive, and which will still drive Geiger counters crazy. In the old days, we used to have not only Geiger counter training, but high range ionization chamber training, and that was what should be done today. Next slide, please. This is an example of just a more detailed set of information for the average physician to have an idea of the prodromal symptoms of radiation exposure at different levels, where you do start to get effects. And that's in the book, so you have that available in this reference also. And the radioactive material, you know what that is. Next slide, please. You all know what that is. But this is one of the sort of things I explain, and I give more detail in an additional, much more detailed set of definitions in the appendix. Chapter 3 is a very short set of definitions that the average person would need, preferably if he had a radiation instrument, needed to understand it, what it's saying. And these next 2 slides, dispersion. In 1958, I attended a meeting at the request of my boss, Dr. Victor Beard, where they talked about many things that you need to know in emergencies, and he talked about his experiments burning nuclear fuel in the desert, surrounded by very flammable materials and aircraft frames as his worst case possible, even not possible, even more than possible, from an aircraft crashing in and releasing material from a fuel element without even all the protections that you have in a nuclear power plant. And guess what? You'll see from what I say in these 2 slides, this stuff didn't go very far, just a matter of 20, 50 feet. So when you consider what was said before, that you could crash an airplane into a power plant, I say in my book, and I think I say it here, you'd have to be a pretty crazy and stupid terrorist to think you're going to get anything out of a nuclear power plant by attacking it. You have to attack it with an atomic bomb. And if you do, you got other worries in this country. So there are a lot of people have been using, we can't We can't have nuclear power plants because they're targets for terrorists. This is another way of people getting around trying to avoid nuclear power, people who are ignorant of the safety provisions of nuclear power plants. So Dr. Alvarez is quite a fine engineer and health physicist, and he's got a chapter in this book here that goes into the details of RDDs, and I think you'd all like to read those if you get into Homeland Security. And so there are 2 slides on the fuel vent burn tests that give you a little information about how high the temperatures were in these tests and how little got out. Oh no, the second one, the fuel element with 10,000 curies was melted down into a puddle in the ground in 1.5 minutes. It was like a Roman candle. And you see, it didn't get very far. So anybody who survives the blast is probably going to be not killed by radiation. Certainly not by the fallout. And then there's another slide. I guess we have to move on. Let's see. Well, this is just another list of showing how safe nuclear power plants are compared to all other things. And of course, the public thinks it's just the opposite. So that kind of information is in the book. So there's a lot of background information you could use for training or talking to the public in this very book without going into any other books that are too technical. And the motivation for preparing for possible bombs, well, it's similar to the motivation I said before. When I was appointed chair of Homeland Security by the Health Physics Society after 9/11, I was admonished not to talk about nuclear bombs, only RDDs. We don't scare the poor public. Well, you think it's not possible? As you showed me by not raising your hands, you do think it is possible that Iran could get a bomb. I want to know why we haven't blasted the hell out of their nuclear facilities a long time ago, and whether anybody knows what Obama has maybe some plans to do that. If he doesn't, I'm worried. I did not pay it out. And anyway, of course, I did not keep my mouth shut and pay homage to that advice. So everything I've done, including in here, deals with nuclear bombs too. This is put this on for the Health Society a couple years after I was chair of Homeland Security and turned it over to John Auxier. John is the guy who did the initial measurements on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki doses. Fine physicist. He's still alive and is ending his service with his second company that he created. He's got a wonderful chapter that gives you the information on the atomic bombs on Japan in this book here. So I hope people will buy that book and get the publisher the cash they deserve for having produced it. Alvarez's views on nuclear bombs, as we've just passed that, and he thinks that it is very possible for small nations, other people than Iran, even to develop some things that they can carry on their backs into this country or on a small ship, small boat. So we have to talk about the possibility. Now, here's this one. This is a indication of the fallout pattern from Bravo where the wind shifted. I was on a boat in a little point down there in the lowest curve in the middle, and they hurled us up below decks, and they stuffed us in like sardines, and we were all griping because it was 130 degrees and humid down there. But I had a pocket chamber one that measured 0.1 R. If I'd have stayed on the deck, I imagine I got at least 50 times that, even though they were washing the deck. Meanwhile, the material landed over, and the poor natives didn't know what it was coming down, and their food and everything. They stood outside, many of them. They got beta burns up to 6,000 rad on their ears in different spots. I've estimated that after I'd already gone to Pitt on a consulting job. It turned out the medical doctor said he thinks that my estimated doses are concurrent with the kinds of damage he saw to skin and the lesions that remained afterward. So you see what you can do is simply knowing how to get out of the rain and not get outside, but stay inside after an attack, particularly if you don't know that people are advising you to evacuate, know where they're telling you to evacuate, and know what they're doing. We should also keep in touch and get our own local responders and chiefs of fire departments on the ball too. Make sure they know what they're doing. And maybe get them more interested in getting some of these serial dosimeters, which they should have bought under the free service of the Department of Homeland Security. The emergency lessons are here for the physicist or anybody who knows a little bit of arithmetic. You may know that if you integrate the power law, t to the minus 1.2 power, that if you integrate it, you got a nice little formula called 5IT. If you measure intensity IR per hour at time t hours, after all the fallout has gone down, then the rest of the dose out to infinity is simply 5IT. So that's something that most people could learn to use to calculate the projected dose if they have to stay in a certain area a certain amount of time. If you subtract one 5IT from another 5IT that's measured, of course you get the dose in between for staying that long. So I put a lot of simple little rules of thumb. I like rules of thumb. In emergency you have to think fast. You need simple things you can keep in your head. The same thing when you handle patients in a hospital. You don't have time to go to the library. You have to have certain things in your head that you know that you can tell whether you can triage real fast whether a person may be in trouble or not in trouble. And usually you can do that kind of triage with simple rules of thumb in a hospital situation. Now here, the next slide, please, is the rise and fall of that fallout on the deck of the ship, from which I estimated that I would have had maybe 5 rem instead of 0.1 if I had stayed up on deck, because they knew how to wash down the ship. The next slide, please, shows the fallout pattern of a 9.7 KT bomb, which might be used against us if we talk about only ordinary bombs, 500 feet in the air. And you'll notice that the fallout pattern goes out to fairly low levels, only at about 1,000, 2,000 yards. So you see a lot of the contamination will not be such that it will kill anyone or have much probability of producing long-term effects. But yet it'll make that Geiger counter go off like I just showed. People have to know that. And this other slide is in the book here from John Hawksyear's chapter. And it shows that if you have a 20 KT or 10 KT bomb, some people could survive if in fairly strong buildings, but still have enough direct radiation. So it's another reason for having this dosimeter right on their bodies to tell them whether they do or not. If it's a 10 megaton hydrogen bomb, of course the radius out to 2 miles on the lower bottom right is a radius out to which they can get 400R lethal dose, but 5-mile radius is where you get complete destruction of everything except the smallest buildings, strongest buildings that would have strong shelters. So there wouldn't be too many people around who would have these high doses from immediate radiation. And this next slide, please, you can look at it in the book. Read about my subtitle and the pages on it. It shows how far you can get a fallout that is readable, and it goes out to 200 miles, you see, at the top level. And I've got a little arrow. I had to dress this up a little bit myself because the diagram taken from the old book is not too clear. But if you look at the book, you'll be able to read it and see what I'm saying. The lessons from the Bravo fallout then are: do not evacuate if more fallout might deposit, and or you do not know where the safe areas are. Seek shelter immediately. Basement corner if possible. Mid-floor if in or near a high-rise building. Basement or a department store with a crowd around you. Subway station, shelter. There are places, even though we've neglected to make shelters in this country, like Switzerland in 1950 passed a law that every home built should have a shelter. It should be usable, so you keep it going for other purposes, for recreation, whatever. And in Switzerland, 95% of the homes have shelters. In Israel, of course, they have to have shelters. I've seen some of them. Every person has to have a shelter within, I don't know, 50 yards or something like they can run into. And they use those, of course, because the rockets are always coming. When I was in Israel recently, they didn't let us go to the lower half of that small state that's like New Jersey because there were too many rockets coming in from Hamas. So they have to have shelters, and they have to have training, even for their children, to face the terror. And we don't have that. We've been very soft and don't even have a proper civil defense program all these years after 9/11. That's another reason I had to write this awful book. It wasn't any fun. Evacuate D.C. That's a picture I took with this little camera I've been using. I was driving to work one day. I took a job for 8.5 years when I was 69. I started a job where I did evaluations of atomic veterans' doses, and I was one, so they captured a real one. And it's also from that evaluations and the data that I saw that I also know that don't worry about internal contamination, and don't get all excited about having to have big suits on. If you're not in a mushroom cloud, which you're not likely to be, you're not going to get enough internal exposure. I know that from handling patients. I also know that from looking at these many, many cases that I dealt with and other people dealt with. And there's some references to some of these reports in the back. So don't evacuate. You can't possibly evacuate DC or any big city in immediate moments after a panic. But here, the next slide, please, it shows you the fallout factors you get. That's taken from an old Federal Civil Defense Administration report, which was then put out by the Department of Defense and so on. Well, for example, one thing I told my wife, she was married with over 20 years to me, and I said, Phyllis, this was about 6 years ago, what would you do if you heard that an atomic bomb had been exploded in Washington, D.C., and here we are out here about 120 miles away where the wind would blow, likely blow, the fallout? And she said, I don't know. I said, all you have to do is fill up the car with some food and drink and go over to see my cousin Arnold, who lives on the 13th floor of the Golden Sands, and just tell Arnold we're going to have a party for a couple of weeks, and we're going to provide the food. And you'll be completely safe because you have all those concrete floors below you to shield you from any radiation. And you have concrete floors above you from a little bit that might be on the roof if it gets there. And you also are probably safe from the biological chemical agents that would disperse and stay low to the ground for the most part. And you're right near the sea, like you go to the beautiful ocean, you'll have some beautiful views there. So have a party for 2 weeks. You see, simple information like that, instead of panic, would save thousands and thousands of lives. So we have to get out there and train the public, and put some truth into the information they have. Here's a shelter I had built when I was just a poor fellow doing night school and also working for Civil Defense Administration. After I left the administration, I built this shelter, so I wasn't doing it to impress people. I was called onto TV twice because of this shelter. They liked my talk so much, they called me back. But yet the reporter completely messed up his article, got it all wrong. That was my first experience with the press. And that's my son, who was about 8 years old at the time, standing up top. He would be 58 now, but he passed away 16 years ago from lupus and kidney transplants. But they had a double wall here. It's modeled after one of the diagrams, similar diagrams of the more stronger shelters that are pictured in the book, taken from one of the old Federal Civil Defense Administration books. So there's some information on shelter and building shelters also in this book here. A minimum of it, but enough to get by. And the next slide, please, are the results of my calculations of the same kind that Ernie Sterngley had misused, as if all the fission products at 3 Mile Island were released. And we all knew back even then, on Saturday after the thing went kablooey, I think it was Thursday, that the TMI event happened. And even by Saturday, people knew that less than 1/1,000,000th of volatile iodines got out of the place. And he's acting like all the fission products that were in the fuel got out to the public. And that's the lie that's in his article that I showed you, all over the country. So there is some technical information here for the scientists or health physicists or anybody else in this audience who certainly understand it if they want to get into that kind of detail and examine my results. I actually republished this kind of thing with some examination of my calculations done on computer and the help of a master's student. And it came out with pretty much the same idea that 300 microcuries inhaled of gross fission products for 30 days after release, either from a reactor or a bomb, within a factor of 2, would be roughly equivalent to the exposure of the whole body to external gamma radiation of 25 rem. And most recently, I've got a reference in here showing that we uncovered a declassified report where the Soviets had actually exposed to humans. And from that information, it looks like my calculations are right on the right line. So there's simple actions for the public. I guess I better run. You had shielding indoors. I've got a picture, some cartoons of shielding myself without having prepared. The last cartoon, I had a cartoonist draw me with books all over my head. I'm lying on the floor. The last thing at least I could do, I've got so many books around the house, I could shield myself with them. So I tell my wife not to let me throw them out, make me throw them out, because at least they're good for shielding. I have books all over the place, and you can shield yourself. And there's information on how much shielding you get for a certain amount of paper and other things in this report. So there's material in there. Next slide, please. This is one of the cases I handled where the hand was cut off, and on his stump he had about 50 times the permissible amount of plutonium. Well, it was americium, I guess, and plutonium at the time. And the poor fellow, he had to have his stump put on. So I was surrounded by the yelling president of the company, where's the hand? And I said, I don't know what hand, I didn't work at the plant. But fortunately, his health physics brought down his hand in an ice box. And then the surgeon was saying, you got to put this on right away, because there's only about a 12% chance that it will take anastomosis. So then my boss, Dr. Wall, said, oh, we can't do that because there might be too much plutonium getting in him and everybody, and I have to have Dr. Brodsky evaluate him. So I was under pressure to evaluate him very fast. I just hung his hand just out so, that far away from the crystal. It had so much americium in it. Measured 60 kV gammas, and I gave the go-ahead to do the operation. I watched the surgeon operating all night with needles, sewing blood vessels together, but it didn't take 3 days later. And I gave a paper sometime later on the results. And after washing and debriding the wound, and after everything was over, and his stump was sealed and healed, I showed that there's no radiation. You can measure the radioactivity from americium. As you know, the smoke detectors give off a little gamma radiation. Well, so does americium give it quite a bit. So if there was any there, we'd have seen it. And so it shows you can handle a patient with quite a bit of contamination of even plutonium or americium and not be afraid. Just use common sense procedures, copper clean procedures, proper debridement, and so on. And there's nothing to be afraid of. Next slide, please. And here's some more experience. When I was teaching in civil defense, I had to put on demonstrations for people in the mayor's office and so on. And here's a civil defense director, and I showed him that I had contaminated the outside of a banana with the uranium solution that I had. And I showed him with the Geiger counter, that red radiation. I peeled it down, and I took a bite, and I gave him a bite. Somebody took a picture. I didn't even know they had this picture. But they had a little newsletter they sent me later in collar from the Civil Defense Organization, and I used the same headline for the slide. Top banana eats hot banana. So that's another thing you can show the public, to tell them they can eat bananas and wash their food off and still not starve. Now here's the next slide, please. That is myself. It doesn't look like me because I'm all suited up in the wrong clothes. But it is really I. And I'm running to pick up my neutron spectrometers in the second H-bomb test. And I ran on this island for about 5 minutes and 30,000 MR per hour. I see I'm carrying that ionization chamber, not a Geiger counter, because the Geiger counter would be off scale. You wouldn't be useful. I had to measure the high range end. But I wasn't afraid. I knew I wasn't going to be there long. I jumped back to the helicopter, contaminated, because my buddy jumped on without taking off his booties, and I was a health physicist. I would have taken them off, but he already jumped on. So the next slide shows running on to the helicopter. They told us not to keep the helicopter pilot there long because they had a limited number of helicopters, and there was 30 r/h in that area. So Don jumped on, and then I jumped on because he jumped on with his booties, you see. Next slide, please. Well, I found myself after I got on the helicopter holding on for dear life. So I couldn't move and I couldn't take my booties off because he didn't close the hatch down. I was looking right into the Pacific as he banked around for 20 minutes to get back to the aircraft carrier. But I put my cutie pie, which is a high-range ionization chamber. They called it a cutie pie in those days. I put that down and I saw 10,000 MR/h I had on my booties. You have to be able to train people to understand that that's not going to kill you. It's a question of time. I had that on my booties for 20 minutes. And I got tens of rad to my feet. I'm still playing tennis with them 56 years later. You see, so not every radiation is dangerous. It's a question of how much, and the responders can learn how much. We're not teaching them properly today, even these many years after. So we have to do some grassroots education. We all have to get out there and talk to the public. Get on television if we can. The next slide, please, is another situation where I was in Federal Civil Defense Administration. This was called the stateside. This was Operation Plum Bob in 1957. The previous one was 1954 out in the Pacific. These are smaller bombs. But they contaminated the land. After about a 10 KT blast, I took a couple firemen and policemen in a Jeep, and I drove them right through ground zero a few hours later. Some people wonder, what am I doing? You know? But I showed that if you move fast enough, you can rescue people and only get a small dose. Our dosimeters are in a pocket, and I've got a report on this. I found in the files, it was a declassified report. I hadn't seen it since I wrote it back in 1957. It gave the doses, that's why I know. The doses are no more than half a rad. Whole body, because we moved fast. So it's a question of training responders to be able to do this and not be afraid of 10 MR per hour, which is ridiculous. They're going to be ineffective, and they're going to be panicked themselves as well as the public. They're going to panic the public as well. So I drove through, and so there's a few pictures here on just a sample picture. There are more in the book of how you can actually build very quickly some shielding for yourself, or if you want to plan and spend a little money, you can build a much stronger shelter. The one, this one is more like the one I built, except mine was even stronger, and it had steel rods between the two outside concrete blocks that were cemented together with concrete, and it had the steel rods, many steel rods between one wall and the other, and it would have withstood an H-bomb at about 5 miles away. My family would have been safe. It was close to my house, so we could run there fast. In fact, we could run out to there in the time it takes the sound wave and the blast to travel the 5 miles. It's about 5 seconds per mile, 25 seconds. You can run pretty fast if you know where to run and what you're doing. Summary emergency lessons are here. Person with enough plutonium contamination surrounding an open wound used thousands of rem to bone per year was essentially free of internal contamination after careful decontamination, debridement, and anastomosis, and final hand removal. We and other medical staff at Pitt were never significantly contaminated or in danger when decontaminating, monitoring, or treating most contaminated patients. And then 4 emergency lessons here. For nuclear bomb fission products, a folded handkerchief over the nose and mouth by someone who's in the passing cloud near you, if it doesn't read hundreds of millions D per M, which would be off scale in a Geiger counter, you couldn't read it, you're not going to die from inhaling. But it's better not to inhale it. Put the 4 folds of a handkerchief are 16 layers of material. And you find if you take a handkerchief, put it over your nose or mouth right now, if you don't have some kind of lung disease, you'll find it's not too hard to breathe through that. And that'll give you some additional protection. And you can also look at it with a Geiger counter or have somebody look at it to see if you really are in an area of internal exposure that would require some further follow-up. But you probably would not be, as I said. So the conclusions are teaching simple rules of thumb can help people save their own lives and the lives of others. A person who knows proper actions to take in an emergency, panic. In the end, take it from here, spread the word, buy the CRAD dosimeters and get all of your governors or somebody to wake up America and buy these things and spread them out. They're cheap compared to all the other money they're wasting on other research projects that are presumably going to be able to triage people. Tell the value in preventing misadministrations also to radiologists and oncologists. There's a big hue and cry in the newspapers that are scaring the devil out of people and shouldn't about getting examined. You should get a CT examination anytime you're requested to get one. Don't let it scare you. Prevent panic, save life with information. That's it. Thank you.
Jeremy knows how to turn the switches on, and I don't. I'm Bob Chiak, diagnostic radiologist by training. I said hello to you just before or in the middle of the talk here. Anyway, on this Office of Science chart that one of the other speakers distributed that lists radiation rates, you know, from minuscule all the way up to 10,000 rem. I don't know if you saw that or not, but
that's what Dr. Maccabee showed, isn't it?
Right. Let's see here. Right, it is. Anyway, one little question here. And you showed the human LD 50 dose in 400 to 500 rad range. But there's another entry here with medical intervention.
Yeah.
It shows the dose would be about twice as much and be so you could survive with medical intervention. Could you describe some of the medical interventions that are effective in this way?
Well, the big one that I was involved in is in the chapter, as I mentioned, in this book, and you would be very interested as a doctor in reading that. I worked with Dr. Wald on that. I wrote that up in summary form, but there's all the information you need. There, my wonderful Dr. Wald, my friend and chairman, luckiest doctor in the world. And very early after the atomic bomb, he became a radiation biologist and physician. And he did a lot of experiments with animals, measuring their blood samples, the numbers of rings in chromosomes, the rates at which leukocytes decreased after exposure, you know. And so he was kind of a world expert on that. He wrote the first paper on leukemia in Science from the Hiroshima and Nagasaki attacks. This little, there was a place nearby that was, had a Van de Graaff operator. It was a Gulf Research Laboratory. They were radiating, making neutrons with a Van de Graaff, 1.5 MeV Van de Graaff. And the gentleman who had, wonderful technician, had been working for 11 years, but nobody inspecting, no safety or radiation safety officers inspecting. One by one, all the safety devices had failed, and he was in there trying to wonder why the hoses were hissing while the beam was on, and his hands and his legs he's got his hands up to 6,000 rad, I measured on a Phantom that I put up right after they found out about the accident. His legs got up to 3,000. Near Wald wanted me to run up to Chicago and examine the Landauer film badges myself to confirm what the dose was. He had a dose exposure rating better of 300 R at waist, and his colleague who didn't have his hands in the beam but was watching him and standing nearby, he also had 300 at waist, but he didn't have his hands and feet in the beam. Well, I put TLD dosimeters, I put ionization chambers, and I put film badges all over the body of this Phantom. And I came up with an estimate of the average dose to bone marrow for this fellow who had his hands and feet in the beam was 600 rad, the average dose of bone marrow. And the other fellow had only less than 300. It was very interesting to see the blood count go down for the man who had only 300 average dose to bone marrow. It went down to 0, the leukocyte count. The leukocyte count of the gentleman who had his hands and the feet in the beam with tremendous doses went down, but then Neil Wald had the inventor of the bone marrow transplant there. He had him do a bone marrow transplant from, guess what? An identical twin brother. Can you imagine how lucky my boss was as a doctor to have his first human case, have an identical twin brother, and be at 600 rad, which is exactly the dose where you might be able to save life if you live with medical care. And they did have these people in in bacteria-free environments too in the hospital. Okay. And the funny thing about this, you see, these two people who were exposed, they were vomited and they had the syndrome, but for a couple of days they weren't sick. They said, "Why are you putting us in the hospital?" And one of them could have died, and the other one got quite a dose. There was another fellow involved. He didn't get much. So, at the Health Physics Meeting in 1969, I sat down after delivering a paper on a plutonium case, and Dr. Wald, my boss, said, "Dr. Brodsky hasn't seen this yet, but my estimates of dose on rings and chromosomes are in exact proportion to his estimates of dose from physical dosimetry," which I had to do right away. So don't tell me people don't want immediate physical dosimetry.
So in addition to a germ-free environment, what other measures would be taken? Purge the body of bacteria that might invade, say, such as from the bowel? And what other supportive measures?
Well, they did a lot of work on the man, and that has been reported in some references that are in this book here. And I may have them in this book here too. You might be interested in the references. Not a lot of publications on it. I never published my work. I gave it to Dr. Wald when I left Pitt. And he didn't publish all the information, but it's in one of my large reports of my projects. So I've referenced that too. Try to take my mess and get out of here.
One more question.
Go ahead.
You said you recently visited Israel, and they're likely to be hit with a nuclear attack. What methods do they use to educate their population, and are there any lessons we can learn from them?
It's a good question. You know, it just so happens, since I live not that far from Washington, I go to a lot of the meetings. I went to the NCRP meeting, and there was a Dr. Bruria Wiesel, who is high up in Homeland Security. And that was the only talk in all of those talks, the talk from Israel, where they talked about preparation of the public. Every year, they have a national program of training. They even train the little children, because the little children get a lot of shock from this. They have to have pre-training with all these rockets coming in. And every year they have pre-training at Israel for any event, and they probably have it. And right now, I have my friend who's distributing these. She's trying to contact some Israelis and get them sold there. Maybe they have, at least they might have the common sense to get these out to people. So far, we're still working on it. We only have a few thousand orders for that badge, which was wonderfully prepared, blessed by the Homeland Security, blessed by all these departments, even the Navy that helped develop it, and yet the people out there do not order them. And this is a good way to start getting information to the public about levels of radiation and how much is safe and how much is maybe not so safe. Most of the doses are going to be safe. And from nuclear power, forget it. There's no problem.
Can you comment on the U.S. government's civil defense websites?
Well, they're listed in here.
Advice
They're listed in the book. Buy the book. I need the money because I've been...
I did. But are they useful? The government... Is the government getting better at
some of it's
out?
useful, but you can check it with my book and then you'll know what's not true. That's another reason for writing my book. And I'm not doing this to win more contracts from the government, as you can tell.